All right, so let's talk about GKE On-Prem architecture. So GKE On-Prem components. So the idea behind GKE On-Prem is that we have kubeception, which is basically a cluster, an admin cluster that manages other clusters in your environment. So on the top here, you can see that we have the admin workstation on the left, and now we have GKE control and kube control, which you all are probably familiar with. So GKE control basically provides you with a set of tools or a command line interface to control your GKE on-prem environment. And it allows you to control your admin cluster as well. And the admin cluster has a virtual machine that controls all of your user clusters. The user clusters is where your workloads actually exist, right? So if you think about GKE on-prem, GKE in the cloud, GKE in the cloud abstracts away your master in some form or way in automation, right? So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to do the same thing in your infrastructure. So you will have the admin cluster, and the admin cluster will be kind of like the mastermind Google that will control the masters of your user clusters, right? So you have this kind of like cluster within a cluster, which is kubeception. And this is the way that it works. Now, you might hear a lot of the terms Kubernetes master, and this is what we've used a lot, especially in the GKE class, whereas we moved away from that term and we're now calling it control plane. So whenever you see a control plane, think of a Kubernetes master. So in here you would have an admin cluster, and that helps you do some cluster creation, upgrade, teardown, and it will have a kubelet, and it will have the rest of your admin control plane. And that admin control plane also controls the connection from your cloud to your on-premise. And then we have the user clusters. And the user clusters is where your workloads exist. So you can see here that you have a virtual machine, and you have kubelet and a workload. These are where your containers actually run in your environment. Yeah. So just kind of walking through this one more time. So you have the admin cluster, and the admin cluster has a control plane that control the rest of the control planes, the user control planes that you have, just to make it a bit more complex. And that's the way that it works. And then you would then use your workloads in your user clusters. It's an elegant solution. In a bit of a complex one, there's a gray area where, so we have a control plane for our user clusters. Are they part of the admin cluster? Are they part of the user cluster? And the answer is kind of both. They're managed by the admin cluster, but they belong to the user cluster. So it's just a very interesting architecture and a way to kind of do it. But generally speaking, just know that you have a cluster that manages all the rest of your clusters. And that cluster manager is the admin. And this is where you can actually this is where the communication or the control plane connection happens to Google Cloud. And installing that, so basically what you would see is you would get an automated deployment from us, a turnkey deployment, that is based off of an OVA file. So this will be a virtual appliance. We're going to ship to you a virtual appliance. You will install it in your on-premise, and then you will basically use GKE control create config, and it will propagate a lot of configuration files. You will take one of the config.yaml files, adjust it to your environment, put all the information that you need, the way that you want it to operate, and then you will pull some images, push them into your container registry, and you will then use GKE control create cluster, and it will create that admin cluster and user cluster for you. And lastly, it will automatically register your cluster with GKE. So online, you will be able to see that cluster in a single pane of glass. Now, you can either use DHCP or static IP addresses for your virtual machines. It's up to you. We found that companies does kind of 50-50. Some of them would like to use DHCP. Some of them would like to use static IP addresses. And it integrates with your existing private or public container registry, and that's really important. That was really important for the clients as well. So that's the general idea.